So I don't think everybody knows this, but these two actually spent close to 10 years working on this series, which was initially supposed to be a documentary film. You bootstrapped it. You were subpoenaed at some point during the process. You moved to Wisconsin for 3 years for this. So 2 years, okay, what's another year? At any point during this long process, did you have a moment of like, screw it, I'm going back to Manhattan? I want to give up. Or were you in it the entire time?
We were definitely in it the entire time. I mean, of course, there were many times where we had to remind ourselves what motivated us initially to take this on. We certainly had no idea that it would go on for a decade, but we definitely felt like, we'd made a commitment to our subjects, we made a commitment to each other and to ourselves to tell this story, and so we were committed to seeing it through.
What inspired you initially to tell this story in particular?
Well, we found out about the story when Stephen made the front page of the New York Times. There were these side-by-side photos. It was, on the left was Stephen walking out of prison after 18 years, surrounded by his family. The photo next to it, 4-inch black and white stripes, walking back into a courtroom, flanked by deputies. And the headline read, "Freed by DNA, charged in new crime." And right there was a story we had never heard of.
Yeah.
And that wasn't even the whole story. So, we had so many questions just right away from that article, and found out that he was going to be having his preliminary hearing, which is the first scene in episode 3. Mm-hmm. That was just 2 weeks away. So it felt like this thing that we, could at least explore and find out, could we pull this off? Could we dive in and start to do this?
How many of you have watched Making a Murderer? Raise your hands. Okay, so most are probably familiar with the story. Give in just very succinct bullet points the synopsis of the film that you made, or the series that you made.
Sure. So Stephen Avery was one of Wisconsin's first DNA exonerees in 2003. He, through DNA, was exonerated of a sexual assault that he had been convicted of in 1985. And after his release, he became a would-be reformer. He was working with a legislative task force that was convened in his name, trying to change the system for the better. And within 2 years of his release from prison, while he had a $36 million lawsuit pending against the county and local law enforcement alleging they'd railroaded him in this 1985 case, a young woman who had gone out to his family's auto salvage yard for business purposes disappeared, and he was charged with her murder. And it was that same county in which he was charged.
And the story over the 10 episodes has so many twists and turns, and so many there are a lot of shocking moments, especially in the legal process itself and in some of the personalities. I mean, in a sense, you couldn't have thought up of I don't want to say better, but just more colorful and weird and just enticing characters. At what point during this 10-year process did you guys realize we are onto something here? This is going to be big. This is an incredible story. I mean, as filmmakers, that's like usually for most people, not a once in a lifetime. It's a never in a lifetime, right?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of goes back to your initial question of, did we ever have moments of giving up? But really, the more we stayed in it, the richer it got, and the more twists there were, and the more reveals. We would talk of this as sort of the gift that kept on giving.
And is still giving.
If you were writing it, people would say, oh no, you can't write that. Like,
yeah.
Nobody will buy that. But if you're pointing a camera at it and it's happening, you can't really argue with it.
What was shocking to you? I mean, you were in it. You're probably, everything around you was kind of just that. You were living this, breathing it. But were there moments where you were just, I cannot believe that this is happening?
there was certainly the time that we watched a video where Stephen ultimately has a co-defendant. It's his much younger nephew, a 16-year-old who had pretty severe limitations, and he winds up implicating himself and Stephen in the murder, and is ultimately essentially interrogated by a member of his own defense team. And we saw video of that, and Moira and I, clearly remember the first time we saw that video, and really were shocked by it and didn't know that sort of thing could go on.
Because you believe he was coerced into...
Well, actually, it was the
Admitting?
fact, I mean, this was an example, too, of how, our viewer experiences this
Right.
series all at once, whereas, we're piecing it together as we go, so we're not actually necessarily experiencing things in the chronological fashion that it's presented. So this video, which took place in 2006, we don't actually see it until 2010. When we're in post-production, and it's actually somebody who's working for Brendan, the nephew, who's part of his defense team, who is trying to get in a confession out of his own client. And we put it in the DVD player and didn't recognize the person, and there was a moment of, who is this cop? And then, oh, it's a defense representative. So those sort of shocking moments.
I think some of what came out of it for me watching it was just this, being struck by how the legal system in many ways, and whether you believe he's innocent or guilty, but the legal system in many ways failed this individual, and seeing this family that socioeconomically was challenged, and in its community was challenged in some ways, and just seeing the legal system and the many flaws there. Not to out you, but you're a former lawyer. Was this shocking to you? Was it surprising to you?
It was certainly an education for me. It was very eye-opening. I mean, we chose this story because of Stephen's unique status as a DNA exoneree, later charged with a serious crime. I mean, we believe that was an unprecedented story, and that was the main reason we wanted to tell it. We thought, what an opportunity to see somebody who's clearly been failed by the system. He served 18 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. He lost his wife. He had 6-day-old twins when he was arrested in that crime. He essentially lost 5 children, and didn't get so much as an apology, really, from the state when he got out. And here he was stepping back into that system only 2 years after his release. So we really wanted to know, over that 20-year period, there had been advances in DNA technology and legislative reforms, but we really wanted to know, had the system evolved over those 2 decades? So,
Any shocks for you when it came to the process that was...
I mean, mostly I would echo what Laura says. I mean, it was very eye-opening to actually travel through the system with these characters. And, that was one of the things, as we did our shooting and, people agreed or didn't agree to participate in the series, we ended up with a protagonist and accused going through the system, and just really trying to document what that experience is like, to be accused in America, whether you did it or didn't do it, how are you treated? And, we talked to so many lawyers through the process of all the interviews we did, and time and again we would hear about, it's so easy to dismiss the problems, it's so easy to say, well, we have the best system in the world, okay, it has its flaws, but if you get pulled into it, or your family member, your child gets pulled into it, it'll be so clear what's working and what's not working. And so wanting to give our viewers an experience like that.
Well, so, and on that note, I mean, what did you want viewers to come away with? Because there has been some criticism about the series that it was one-sided, that you had your opinion and you conveyed that opinion, and so what is the role of a documentary filmmaker here? What did you hope viewers would come away with?
I mean, I guess going back to what I was just saying, trying to offer viewers an experience, we had a main character, we had a protagonist, and he had a point of view, and he had a goal and a want. So you're on a journey with him, and there are moments when you feel one thing, and then the next episode you might feel the entire opposite. And to actually go through that transformation on your own is a lot different than somebody telling you that, which was one of the reasons this took 10 years was because we were very adamant about it needed to have a big footprint. It needed to play as a series. If we had to do it, put it into the box of the feature film, first of all, you'd have to leave out history. So much for history repeating itself. You'd probably have to leave out the Brendan storyline, the nephew, but more than that, you would have to start telling people the story instead of showing it to them, just for the sake of time, and that would just have so much less impact.
So the series, while we don't have exact numbers because Netflix doesn't share numbers, did incredibly well by everything that I've read and heard, and by seeing how many hands went up, of course, more anecdotally, and was critically acclaimed. You've won several Emmys for it, but you pitched it around a bit before Netflix bought it. Did you have any sense along the way that it would become such a hit? I mean, at this point, it spawned so many blogs and conspiracy theorists and people who have just become kind of like rogue detectives trying to help to piece together this case. Are you surprised by the level of interest?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a dream come true in a sense, because we wanted to reach the widest audience possible, and we wanted to promote a dialogue about, what we witnessed and what we documented and what we think comes through in the series. I mean, it's an incredible journey that we were on, because this was so homegrown. It was so, it was self-financed. We had no promise of anything. I mean, our initial production, we weren't really thinking beyond the work itself. We weren't thinking about the industry or where we might find a home. We were basically just on the ground doing the job. And it wasn't until we moved back to New York that we had to face the harsh reality of, okay, we know what we just captured, but we have over 1,000 hours of footage. We have, tens of thousands of pages of documents and other, archival material. How do we begin to pull this together in some way and distill it, and bring it to a potential buyer and convey to them the promise of this project? We didn't know how we would do that. And initially, we were writing grant applications, and we went to a film market where we were pitching it as a feature, but we knew in our hearts that this really needed to have a larger footprint, and that the story should drive the format rather than the format driving the story. So,
questions for Laura and Moira from the audience? And by the way, they were already peppered with theories backstage of of what really went on. Raise your hand if you have a question at any point. We have one back there. Should be a microphone coming to you.
Do you think you had any role in Brendan's release recently?
He wasn't released, was he?
No, Brendan is actually still in prison.
Oh, yes.
But you're right that his conviction was overturned.
It was overturned. Okay,
Yes.
so what's the next step then?
So the state is appealing that decision.
Okay.
So that will take, that's playing out now in the courts.
Yeah, I mean, as a viewer,
yeah.
totally. I mean, it just obviously seems like he was inappropriately involved one way or the other. I mean, from, the documentary evidence that you provided. And I was just curious what your thoughts were.
And I think more broadly, just your role in what's currently going on with Stephen Avery as well, because they're also running new tests and hoping to
That's true.
Yeah, so I think more broadly, it'd be interesting to hear what you see as your role in all of that unfolding.
I mean, just speaking directly to Brendan Dassey, I mean, it's clear that the judge that made the decision to overturn his conviction had, gone through the record very meticulously and had watched the videos. So it's impossible to say whether he, would have put in that effort or not without the series. But, he was clearly looking at the evidence when he issued his decision. But there are ways in which clearly, I mean, maybe I'm skipping ahead to what we're up to now, but we are in production on new episodes of the series, and it's clear that the world that we're documenting now is a new world. It's very affected by the fact that the series exists, whether that be the families or the lawyers or the cases. So.
I would hope that we didn't influence the judge's decision. It's a federal judge. We certainly have no evidence that the judge watched the series or, I mean, I don't know whether he knows of it, but the judge had the case for 20 months, and he wrote a 91-page opinion, which was very thorough. And I mean, all of that points to just a judge who was very diligent, took it very seriously, worked through the record, and as Moira said, watch the interrogation videos. So my hope would be that that process was untainted by the series.
Thank you for the question. What about there are recordings of conversations that you had with Stephen Avery in the series, and there was a relationship that was formed, obviously. How did you make sure, and I'm not just talking about remaining unbiased and neutral in whatever way possible, but how did you make sure that you weren't too emotionally involved and affected by what you were dealing with day to day? And it's very morbid stuff also. I mean, it's dark stuff.
Well, we had a very organic relationship with Stephen. I mean, we first made contact with him by writing to him just about a month after we attended his preliminary hearing, where he first learned that he would be going to trial on charges that carried mandatory life. So the fact that he responded to our letter and that he was open to our process was really a gift. We made clear to him that we were not there to judge him, that we were there to listen, and to give him a voice if he cared to have one. And he agreed to participate. He put us in touch with his family. We met with them. They participated, so that all worked out really well. I mean, we had very clear boundaries too. We did not talk about the facts of the case. We weren't investigating the crime. We were documenting the case or the prosecution. So it was a very different thing. And so, I mean, it was an experience to establish a rapport with someone, who's awaiting trial for murder and rape and mutilation of a corpse. I mean, these are, some of the most serious crimes someone could be charged with. But, we just tried to be professional and not judge. And, I don't know what else to say about it.
Well, maybe getting to the idea of how do you deal with not getting too emotional about it. And I do think that's a tricky balance, because you don't want to be unemotional about it, because it is really important and emotional and, dark material. And there's a reality to that can't be lost. So you have to be able to stay in touch with that.
Well, I think
your work.
I think you guys struck an amazingly delicate balance with the series, and I'm personally very excited to see what you do next. So thank you guys so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.